Well, welcome back everybody. Hope you have enjoyed your lunch. Initially the plan was that we had both Slava, Wagner and Kent here back on the floor. But unfortunately Slava couldn't make it. Dealt with some kind of virus, corona, something like that. So that was a bit unfortunate for him. I'll keep the session short. You've seen both Wagner and Kent already. Well, actually, what they are going to do is, of course, they are from the most popular integration services, being Azure Logic Apps, and they are going to unveil roadmap patterns and other significant updates in the Logic Apps. Please welcome Wagner and Kent.
Right? So, there we go.
I wanted more aggressive music, so we got it. So thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. We're going to spend some time on Logic Apps roadmap, some of our recent investments, and then also we're going to be collecting some feedback from you folks. Unfortunately, as mentioned, Slava, who leads the Logic Apps product team, he's our GPM, came down with some symptoms last week, so he was unable to travel, but I know he was very much looking forward to this event.
He tried really hard. I saw him doing like the tests up to the last day, but unfortunately it didn't work.
So as part of the feedback that we're going to be collecting from you folks, we want you to go ahead and access this URL. And so this is both people in the room, also people online. There's a tool called Poll Everywhere. That's the short URL, pollev.com/integrate2022. There's no login, there's no sign up required, so there's no GDPR concerns there. This is Microsoft collecting the data. This isn't Kovi, so just wanted to call that out. And the first survey is more of just an icebreaker. Just let us know where you live. Obviously, people in the room, we know where you're dialing in from, but where do you normally live? And we'll show a slide in a little bit. And then later on, when we get into the roadmap section where we're asking for feedback about how you feel about certain things and also investment areas, we're going to be using this tool. So just wanted to get that up and ready from that perspective.
Okay. So from an agenda point of view, we're going to be talking about some of the announcements and the roadmap, right? So from everything that happened since Integrate last year, probably. Then we're going to be talking about some recent investments and especially focusing on building enterprise trust, right? So we already teased a little of those things when we discussed in the previous sessions, but we're going to go down a little bit on some of those. And then we're going to be asking for some feature feedback around, especially around DDI integration and also automated testing. That's where you're going to be using Poll Everywhere. So let's see if you guys are starting to connect and started to do the homework. Let's see how things are going so far. Whoa. People's coming from a lot of people coming from Europe. It's like one coming from New Zealand, supposed to be two, but I didn't reply to that yet. But there we go, right? So this is just showing like how the tool is going to be working, and we're going to be using that more to collate some of the feedback from you on later on. So from a products update point of view, there is a lot of things that happens in the last year or so. We came up with the built-in connectors as part of Logic Apps, right? So the Azure Blob, the Azure Table Storage, SFTP, and FTP all been light up. There are more on the roadmap to come. The SQL Storage Provider is now in public preview. This is the case where if you needed to use needed to be more certainty about the pricing of your storage, or also when you needed to use that in cases like the on-premises, that's where the SQL storage is going to be quite handy. If you're interested on those kinds of scenarios, right, go and check out with the public preview. We have some of the exports from Logic Apps consumption to Logic Apps standard in private preview right now. And that is like getting one Logic Apps consumption and moving it into a standard application, right? All in the portal. So we improving even more that experience, and we're talking about that on some of the investments. We've got easy Auth available, generally available. So now, just like in any other app service, you would be able to authenticate at the app level even before you get into the workflows, right?
Yeah, so for people that don't like having that SaaS token on the end of your HTTP trigger, this is the feature for you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Managed identities is another one from the security block that is now generally available, right? So think about easy authors like coming into Logic Apps. Now you have a way to deal with that with OAuth. Going out of Logic Apps, now we can elect an identity for your Logic App standard and connect as an application instead of having to connect with the username and password. So that is generally available and has been lighting up in a whole lot of connectors. Finally, the Swift encoder and the decoder is in private preview. So if you're using Swift, it is interesting to see what is coming up there. Please sign up on the aka.ms/Swift preview, right? So people that is using Swift knows is to enable some of the financial scenarios, and it's quite a common standard. From a roadmap point of view, there are some things that we are working right now. We're working on an improved designer, and we balanced that early on. And the idea now is making it faster, make it like able to improve the performance of the designer. Kent was when I was running the things, running into that problem, right? You're having to refresh, and all of a sudden it slows a little bit. Like on day-to-day, it's not too bad, but when we needed to demo, can take time, and all of that time adds. So we're trying to shave as much time as we can on that. But we're going to be the improvements on how we put in all those things together. Data mapper is another big one, right? Today, the only mapping that we can do is XML to XML using some the things that we have in the past, or the liquid templates, but you don't have any visual aids on that. So what we're trying to light up on that one is the any-to-any kind of scenario, right? So you can actually using one single data mapper to do all your mapping needs. Availability zones from availability point of view, we now having that some of them is already in preview, right? And some of them is already light up. So what we're going to do with that is the ability to one Logic Apps standard, for example, be deployed in 3 different data centers inside of that channel, on that region, that give you better availability, right? And it's like make it safer for you to get that application in place. Export, as I said, we have something more coming from export, not just the single Logic Apps to a new one. We're going to be looking into the ability for you to look into an ICE environment and select the number of Logic Apps that wanted to export, and export that to a Visual Studio Code. So code first, so you can do like all your testing and plug in that on the CI/CD pipeline, instead of having to get that portal to portal, and then after that retrofit everything. So we're doing that for ICE and for consumption. We're going to start with ICE because today there is nothing for ICE for export, but we're going to do the other ones. And finally, we have a lot of connectors that is going to be coming in private preview. Not go through the whole list, but if you wanted to look into what we're doing, we can go to Logic Apps connector roadmap. And this is going to point you to our GitHub repository. And we keeping that list public there. So everything that we have news on those connectors, we're going to be adding that. Finally, we have like some CLI support. Like today we have something, but it's at the app level. We're trying to move down to the workflow level, right? Some of the gestures at the workflow level. So you could like enable, disable one workflow through CLI or things like that. And we're going to have more regions coming, right? So there is, you can see that it's like quite busy with a whole lot of things to come.
So which of those is your favorite feature?
Export, because I'm working on it. So I'm looking into that day to day, and it's coming quite nicely. Cool. You wanted to talk a little bit about
Sure.
Mapper?
Yeah, so this is the data mapper, really that unified experience that we're after. So today you're generally dealing with like the enterprise integration pack, like the BizTalk tools, or you're dealing with Liquid. And naturally there's some friction in terms of understanding both of those technologies and having prerequisite tools, and that can be a little bit challenging. And so that's the goal of the new data mapper, is that you would have a unified experience whether you're in Portal or whether you're in VS Code, and the ability to do any to any. So you could go from JSON to XML, or XML to JSON, or XML to XML, et cetera, and to be able to have that in a unified experience. We will also have some, they won't be functoids, but they will be something like a functoid, probably like a function, that will allow you to do some of those things that you can do today, like string manipulation and things of that nature.
Cool. You talk about that?
Imagine that, there's a slide for it.
Yeah, so the idea of the logic apps, exporting to logic apps standard is going to be looking both to, as I said, ICE and consumption. But now we can collect a group of logic apps and make an app out of that, right? Because that's how we encapsulate the things on a logic apps standard. And it's going to be a Visual Studio Code experience. So inside Visual Studio Code, you can go there and say, I wanted to export from Portal to here. You can select the items, and they're going to putting everything together in terms of here is the application with all your logic apps, parameters associated in the right places, connections already with scripts for you to run, right? And then you can have the ability to get all of that and pushing into source control, continue with your CI/CD, or take advantage of Visual Studio Code and publish, right-click publish from there for you to start testing, right? I know, Rick, friends don't let friends right-click deploy, but it's there, it's available. Cool. So let's start talking a bit about enterprise readiness. So in order to talk about that, let's think a little bit more about the anatomy of a logic app standard, right? So anything in Azure today is a resource group, but now we have a new container that is your logic app standard plan, right? You're starting to look at that and see app services is because it's exactly like that, right? So you have a workflow standard plan, that is your app service plan. Inside of that, you have your logic apps standard app, that is a group of workflows plus a whole lot of metadata, right? The metadata that we have there is like the app settings, the parameters, and the connections. On top of that, you also have the ability to have a storage account deployed in Azure. That is where all the runtime and information is going to be stored. You have the ability to have API connections, right, for anything that is not built in. And finally, you have the ability to have the app insights. Why that is important is because now this is going to enable a whole lot of scenarios that was not available in pure logic apps consumption. Right? First one is like AWS plan can host multiple logic apps, right? So you can start to define a little bit more how you wanted to organize your logic apps and who sits together with who based on things like business process or performance or geolocation, right? So we can take advantage of the elastic scaling for some particular sets of logic apps, scale more in some, scale less in some, depending on what you're doing. And we did some work on that and put together a blog post, right? That is, unfortunately, it's not that one. Look at that. But I'll share the link with you guys later. The other thing is, because now your logic apps, you have a better view on the compute. You can treat logic apps standard as any enterprise app, right? You can define your capacity planning for that. You should be testing it for the performance that you want. And you can use App Insights to derive the counters and get all the information to know before you go to production what is the expected load and how you should be scaling on that, right? In order for you to help with this, in this case, this is the right of the blog post. You can go to less logic apps standard async burst workload blog. This is a first of a series of blog posts, and that one show you how a burst workload with like 40,000 and 100,000 messages is supported on Logic Apps Standard, right? But we're going to be creating some more of that.
All right, so let's talk about some other things that are available today from an enterprise readiness perspective. Clemens briefly touched on this a little bit in their context in terms of streaming, but this is actually really important and actually really cool. So availability zones for both consumption and standard, so this is in preview. But what this allows you to do is increase your availability across an Azure region. So if you think about an Azure region, there's generally multiple data centers with extremely low latency based on Clemens' example of how that low latency is for their messaging performance. But what this allows you to do is operate in an active manner. So when you provision logic apps within an availability zone, you actually have replicas of that instance that's running for you. Now, what's really beneficial about this is you don't have to manage endpoint configuration. If anyone's ever tried to do disaster recovery with BizTalk, that was probably one of your biggest headaches, was trying to manage endpoints. And so that's the opportunity here, is that there's a single instance, a single configuration store, but you do have multiple instances of it. In the event that one of those Azure data centers go down, Microsoft will attempt to bring it back online, but in the meantime, you still have 2 other instances that are running. And so this is actually something that people with like high availability needs should really consider when they deploy this. Now, when we talk about consumption, this is something that's really interesting for customers in the sense that you kind of get this for free. We provide this ability for you. It's completely abstracted away from you, and you don't even see this, but it is actually running in multiple data centers within an Azure region. Standard, this is something that we'll see in the demo here shortly, where it's more explicit. You can see the number of nodes that are actually basically instantiated, and then naturally if you have scaling out that's enabled, it'll further scale from that perspective. So this is something that is currently opt-in, so you need to make an explicit gesture when you are creating your Logic App instance, whether that's consumption or standard, but this will be something that's automatically enabled for consumption in the future. And then also note that this is in select Azure regions. So when you go to check the radio button, if it's not enabled, chances are it's not in that region, but we continue to deploy these out to more and more regions. So here we've got, I'm hitting the wrong button, that's why.
Oh, okay. Oops. Yeah, this is running.
So here what we have is just a demo of the portal and that provisioning experience. When you go to create a new Logic app, you select standard, and when you select standard, if you choose the right region, you'll have this ability to enable the availability zones for your Logic App Standard instance. Now, when you actually go take a look at your scale out properties, you're going to know that there's 3 that are provisioned for you automatically. Now, naturally, if you have other burst capabilities, you're going to continue to scale out, but you will always have a minimum of 3 instances. So you can kind of look at this. If you do have significant load that warrants having those 3, you're going to do this anyways. The difference is it's going to be distributed across multiple data centers within an Azure region itself. So generally, if you're doing larger scale workloads, something you're going to want to take a look at.
Yeah, so on that one, you're going to have performance, resilience, and availability all in the same package.
And those are all difficult things to manage if you're doing on-premise middleware. So next up, I want to talk a little bit about private endpoint and VNet connectivity. So this is another really important topic, is people think of moving their workloads from on-prem up to the cloud. And so we're going to deal with 2 different scenarios. The first scenario is more of a private endpoint scenario where we have logic apps, and we want those logic apps to only be accessed from a specific VNet. So what we can do is go into our logic app, enable a private endpoint, and choose the VNet that endpoint needs to be dropped in. What that then means is that only systems from within that VNet can call our logic apps. And so that's scenario 1, where you might have, say, an SAP or an IBM or some other line of business system, and you want it to call your logic app, but you want to make sure that that traffic is only originating from a specific VNet. So that's scenario number 1.
And that's a scenario that was not available at all for consumption, right?
True, yep. Though that is part of the benefit of running a single tenant logic app instance. And then scenario 2 is something that we saw today, although we kind of abstracted a lot of that away from you, where we might have a PaaS service like Azure SQL. And we want that Azure SQL to only be accessed from within a VNet. So what we can do is expose a private endpoint to a VNet for the Azure SQL instance. And then what we can do is connect our Logic Apps standard instance to that same VNet. And so that all of our traffic will then get routed through that specific VNet itself. So it gives you a lot of that sort of on-premises network isolation, but we're now in the cloud and we're running PaaS services. So it's actually quite powerful from that perspective. And here's just a brief demo. We're going to start with a SQL server, and we go in and we enable a private endpoint, and we'll be able to go ahead and choose a specific VNet where that private endpoint will be installed. So we'll let that just catch up.
And while you're waiting for that, the one thing to notice is, although that we're talking about still cloud native on that one, there is nothing stopping you if you have connectivity to on-prem from that VNet to go all the way down to the on-prem with that same scenario.
And then so what we're seeing here is once we've deployed that private endpoint into the VNet, we go into Logic Apps and we go into the networking blade and we choose to enable that VNet connectivity itself. And so what we'll do is we'll join it to the same VNet itself, and then we'll be able to establish that communication. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm in my Logic App standard instance that's connected to that VNet. I can go do a simple query against SQL itself, and we've got success. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to then provision a Logic App consumption instance, and we're going to go ahead and try to connect to that database, and naturally it's going to fail because that's going to be coming from a public address as opposed to being routed through the VNet itself. And so this is another opportunity for using standard where you get all of these enterprise features without a huge price tag. So that's pretty cool. And then the third scenario we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on is called access restrictions. Now, you can do something similar to this with API management. And if you have access to Azure APIM and you want to be able to do allow and deny lists, you should use that feature. But in the event you don't have APIM, this is a good alternative. And so what we want to do here is we've got an HTTP trigger that's exposed, and we want to limit who can actually hit that endpoint. So Easy Auth will go ahead and take care of authentication, but if we still wanted to prevent access from specific network ranges, that's not going to help us. So what we can do is enable access restrictions and then create essentially a permit or deny list that will say we're going to allow traffic from this specific IP ranges, or we can explicitly deny traffic from other ranges as well. And what's pretty cool about this feature is it's really easy to enable. We once again go into the networking blade for Logic App Standard. We can go ahead and click on the inbound section where we're going to see this access restrictions. We go ahead, we create a rule. In this case, I'm going to create an allow rule. And then by default, it will create a deny rule for everything else. So I'm basically saying, I want to allow access from this IP, block everything else. And so in this case, it was my laptop at home where I was doing the test. And then I can go ahead and create a Logic App with an HTTP trigger. And for that network that I've basically allowed, that connectivity is going to go through. And we're going to be able to get a response from the Logic App. Then if I go ahead and I create a consumption-based Logic App where it's going to have a different IP range and try to call that same endpoint, it's going to get access denied. And that's what we're seeing from that perspective. So a very simple way to enable another layer of governance on top of your Logic App instances.
One place that I used that before was even when we have in API management, if you wanted the API management to be public, then get the backend IP of the API management and say, I only allow calls from that particular IP.
For sure. Yeah, and that's how you would do it if you had APIM accepting that traffic. You would basically create an allow rule for that instance, that IP, and then you would funnel all traffic through APIM.
Security teams are going to be like all happy with you, and it's like we're really hardening that, but super easy to do.
Very easy to accomplish. Okay, now we're going to start getting into a little bit more of the roadmap and some of the feature areas, some feedback. So we do have some investments coming around EDI and integration account user research. So Divya, who you may have met before at some of these previous events. She's the PM leading the charge on this. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it. So you'd be doing her a great favor if we could collect it, and us a favor if you could provide these signals. But really the question is do you build B2B applications using EDI standards? Do you onboard partners at scale? And then basically, as we're also considering a makeover to the integration account, we're conducting some user research. And so we're definitely interested in feedback that you folks may have. The last slide, we've summarized all of these different surveys. So you can basically take a picture at that screen, but we are interested in your feedback. And so some of the things that we're thinking about pertaining to integration account makeover is a higher limit for artifacts. I'm sure that's something that people will enjoy. Improved experience for artifact management. So today it's a rather flat list. If you do have a lot of artifacts, it may be a little bit difficult to manage. Flexible data store, like today it's an integration account. Would you be interested in some other sort of back-end storage for it?
Or even bring your own data store, because today is all managed by the platform, right?
True.
You don't have a say on that.
Better DevOps support, so being able to sort of manage this through your pipelines, and then disaster recovery support as well. So if you folks want to open up your poll EV instance, what we'd love to do is get a little bit of a stack ranking about features as it pertains to EDI. So you can go ahead and when you click on basically an item, there's an up-down arrow, so you can basically assort your features in priority. And so as you folks do that, we'll see this graph update, and we'll be able to see read the room and read the online stream as well.
There we go. So look, no hands. It's actually you guys doing that, okay?
So we'll just give another sort of minute or two, and then we'll jump ahead to the next one.
And that poll is going to be open until we get the next one. So if you didn't have the chance to do it right now, but you wanted to go, you can still move to that one until we show the next one.
Yeah, so we've got a slide, and then we get to the next one.
Exactly.
So we have a
So
couple
have a
minutes.
little bit of minute.
So we've got performance, large message support,
Is a neck and neck
and then
race.
DevOps.
Cool.
Okay, so we'll jump to the next slide. That will still remain active for a few minutes.
So one of the features that we enable, I think, really recently was an automation task, right, to replicate the message either on Service Bus or Event Hubs. Until I know that the team on messaging was always thinking about the data replication for the geolocation, but in the meantime, we still have an issue of we only have the replication of the metadata, not the data itself, right? So this is a way to coming into that to fix that problem. So it's based on one of the replication patterns, right? That is if I'm not wrong, is like the one that is moving the message on the other side, and as soon one of the messages consumed is removed from the other side as well. And the reason for that is exactly to alleviate a little bit the R scenarios on messages, especially on Service Bus. Being on that kind of situation before as a consultant, I can see how that would be useful to maintain those data in case of a disaster on your DR. And we're going to have some questions, a question about that one on the next, right, to get a little bit of feedback of what you think of this feature. So what we're trying to find out here is what you're using to back up those critical data, right? So how are we doing that? How are we managing that DR kind of scenario today?
YOLO. YOLO's doing well. Eldert, you've got some work to do.
Well, yeah, and but that kind of reflects reality in a way. It's like a lot of people didn't have an easy way to do that, and it is a lot of work. So the follow-up question on that one would be like if did try that tool, if not, have a go to see if it would fit your needs. YOLO is.
Should we stop this?
Yeah. So let's move, shall we? Cool.
So this one should be interesting. So this is a little bit sort of open-ended. What we wanted to do though is give you folks an opportunity to express what's really top of mind for you. So this is a little bit of free form in terms of like what are features that you'd like to see inside of Logic Apps. Do look what other people are doing because you can vote up so that we don't have a bunch of duplicates. Either.
Either. Mm-hmm. Is your wish list?
Because I'm on consumption on standard.
Well, it's a feature, right? So put it up.
So yeah, do look to see if there's a duplicate because voting up will then help it rise to the top. Now, while that's going on, Rohitha, do you mind if I put you on the spot? Okay, so wanted to introduce another member of the team. So this is Rohitha, if you don't mind just waving. So he's a principal engineering manager on the Logic Apps team. He's been around pretty much since day one. So if there's something about the product that you'd love to know, chances are he can answer it. His team generally deals with a lot of the back end. So a lot of these investments we've seen around standard have been done by his team. Obviously, there's some other teams involved as well, but if you have deep questions about performance and the nitty-gritty, chances are he'll be able to answer that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So should we keep that one
So we'll leave this one open, yeah. We don't need to shut it down.
And
So
we have one more slide.
just a call to action slide,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So let's go to that one, and then we open up for any questions that you might have. Cool.
So yes, here's the ways that you can get in touch with us. So we've got Logic Apps on Twitter, YouTube. As we mentioned before, we are making a commitment to do more Logic Apps live. So if you folks enjoy that, like and subscribe. Also, there's an email address there if there are questions. No SLA guaranteed around that, but it is a channel that we do monitor. And then also surveys. So these are important, channels that we can collect your feedback. We did something similar for the BizTalk migration investments that you saw earlier this morning. That was a result of survey. We take these things very seriously. So if you're interested in EDI and integration account, we've got a survey there. I know I had some people asking me about pricing. There we are. You folks go ahead and fill out that one. We've also got the SAP private preview. There's another question about that earlier this morning. So please check that one out. And then also Swift private preview on standard. If you're doing those types of transactions, go ahead and fill out that survey and we'll be happy to engage with you further and better understand your needs.
And just to give an idea of how serious you take in those surveys, like a lot of the information that you saw on Bala's keynote about the BizTalk strategy was all based on feedback that you all gave on surveys, right? We pretty much use that to drive a lot of the conversations that we find and understand where we should be prioritizing things. Mm-hmm. So how are we going with time?
So we have 5 minutes. I believe if I got that right. Is that right?
Yeah, the microphone will be around. Start a bit later.
Okay, that's good, because that means that we have 5 minutes for questions, right? So we might be able to answer one or two. Anyone?
Maybe let's go back to the...
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
About DevOps, the connection file in Logic Apps standard.
Mm-hmm.
Says the Microsoft documentation you can parameterize it, but don't seem to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did some tests on that one. I find out that you're able to parameterize and use it on DevOps, but then if you do that, then you lose the ability to run it locally, right? So it's something that we are tracking and trying to improve on that one. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's like that we should be updating the...
It's the ID that's not working, especially to Microsoft SQL Server.
Mm-hmm.
You can put app setting on 2 other parameters,
but not on the ID.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
the subscription ID, and you cannot use
I'll take that one offline with you, and then maybe we can chat with Rohita, and we know who to redirect to internally, right, if you need to.
Repeating the question.
Okay, sorry. So the question was about the connectors.json file. Like there is a discrepancy between what we say on documentation about parameterization of that and how that seems to be working on or at least locally on VS Code. Yes?
So today we need a separate for function apps and logic apps standard. Is there a plan so that we can use the same app services, and because from an enterprise point of view, it's pretty expensive when we have to buy 2 premium SKUs.
We have a solution for that today when we use AppSafe's environment v3. So if you're using AppSafe's environment v3, like that isolated SKU, right? That one thing that was news for me is if you don't put anything, if you just set the AppSafe's v3 and don't make anything, you're going to be paying for the reserved capacity. But if you're starting to put applications there, it's going to be using that reserved capacity already, right? So if you have like a function and an app, logic apps, it might be getting really close to what we'll be paying for 2 anyway. So maybe it would be something to explore. Would also give you the ability to like better network isolation if it's the case, but the main for your case would be the main thing would be that one.
Mm-hmm. I guess the other thing maybe just to add, like when we talked about that BizTalk migration slide this morning, we weren't super explicit about what .NET framework support meant, but the plan is to be able to upload assemblies and to be able to call those within Logic App Standard itself. So it'd be good to know if that would address the need and you're kind of deploying a function because that's the only way that you can execute compiled code, or if there's other scenarios. So it'd be great to connect after just to better understand that.
Cool. Have time for one more? Okay. Gentleman on the back.
Question was really just about testing and automated testing. So in many parts of the pipeline, for example, with functions apps, very common patterns for testing and unit testing, those types of things. When it comes to kind of platforms as a service, which have that visual component, not quite sure how to do that and how to fit that kind of automated mindset to it. Just any advice or guidance you've got and ideas about where you might go in that space?
So we are looking into that because that is something that that I agree as a consultant. It was one of the problems that I had, right? So we are looking into that as part of the investments for the next year to be able to improve like mocking and unit testing in general. But today, depending on your scenario, if your scenario is more around HTTP kind of thing, logic apps, there is some guidance on one of the blog posts that one of our engineers, Henry, wrote, and we've been using that. We also know that Mike, I'm not sure if it's going to be, yeah, Mike is going to be talking exactly about that on his session. So that's one to look into. Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay, seems like Alex did. That means no time, right? So I'll talk to you offline because he just cutting me. Thank you very much, everyone, and we can have
Covey.co